Hello, this is Cotton Stoops and welcome back to another Loomian Legacy video. And today's video, we're going to be talking about the top 20 Loomians of Loomian Legacy. First off, I'm going to be going a few sets of rules here, and the only rule that you should be knowing here is that the Ubers are not going to be considered. Now, whether or not you think Dragonin or like Cephalops are Ubers, most of the competitive metagame and communities have all considered these guys Ubers, so whether or not my opinions on them will be changing, depending on my experiences fighting them, these guys are staying Ubers. However, I will be mentioning some of these Ubers by name in the honorable mentions, specifically Mutagon and Dragonin, as they're going to be getting reworks to their abilities, which will of course change how they're going to play. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's get right along with the list. Alright, so Chienta wasn't actually supposed to be on the list. I forgot one Loomian, so Chienta will be going in the honorable mentions section. Sadly, it's not going to be on this list, and something else will be on this list, so yeah. Sorry, the real number 20th Loomian of this list is going to be... Next up, we're going to be talking about Valkyrie, which makes its place in the top 20 very reluctantly. Valkyrie I've been pretty harsh on as of late, and ever since the new Atlantic City Part 2 meta has came out. Valkyrie, ultimately, its speed tier is getting so much worse, and Valkyrie as of right now is ultimately not the best Loomian to use offensively, but because of how hard it can hit and how great it can support your teams. For example, Valkyrie has the ability to be able to stop metagame threats such as Nomadis, Glishadia, Cosmere Unleashed, Charonix, and much more, making Valkyrie a pretty good blanket check and an overall enabler for offense with Flash and Flee. What's also great about Valkyrie is that it still hits hard, and because this meta is mainly focused around semi-stall or baffle cores, Valkyrie can take advantage of both. Valkyrie being a part of a baffle core, or Valkyrie just breaking semi-stall because its speed here isn't really that much of a problem when you're up against slower Loomians, and overall, Valkyrie is just a pretty great Loomian. There are some problems with it, such as its weaknesses, but Valkyrie as a necessity on teams as being one of the best metal types to use is really great. So next up on the list is going to be Alantic. Alantic, this is also a very reluctant choice. This is mainly because Alantic is kind of competing with another electric type wall breaker in this metagame, and because of that, Alantic has kind of struggled to find a place, at least in my opinion, throughout this metagame. However, it's still as great as it was once before. It didn't gain much counterplay in this meta, only like very robust Dokomori. Thunderlin is also getting a little bit better, but overall, this still has one of the best coverages in terms of melee wall breaking. You have Primal Slash from Obsidian, you have other coverages against other offensive Loomians, and while said Loomians like Obsidian can still stop this thing because of resilience, this does pressure teams heavily because of bulk up, making it a lot more stronger and bulkier as the time goes on, with bulk up setting up every single time. And because it does have a decent speed tier, this speed tier is getting somewhat more irrelevant as more offensive Loomians are getting faster than this. However, I believe that Alantic, in terms of wanting a solid melee wall breaker that isn't reliant on other aspects of your team, I'd say that Alantic is probably one of the best consistent answers for that question. So next up on this list is going to be somewhat controversial, but I really don't think so, and that is Odiaga. Odiaga is ultimately probably much better than Shachi. Initially, once this released, I thought Shachi was just so much better, but as the metagame progressed and of course teams have started putting more thought into their team building, Odiaga has become much better because of its bulk that it has. 83, 109, and 73. While this may not look that great, in combination with Provoke, Peace of Mind, and your coverage, it makes Odiaga very strong. Speaking of that coverage, it also has a lot of coverage moves it can choose from. You can choose from Frost Beam, Fire Breath, and Dark Surge, and much more. And more so on Provoke. Let's talk about this. Provoke has the ability with in tandem with its defenses to break through a lot of answers, such as Soulburst Gasstroke and Pyrolint and Cleon. Those Loomians are no longer threats to Odiaga because it can just provoke and set up on them. Odiaga is ultimately probably one of the best Loomians in terms of fighting semi-stall because its bulk, specifically on its range defense, looking like to be a pretty dang hard issue to deal with, now isn't really that hard anymore because of your matchups against more bulkier teams. What's also great about Odiaga is that it can generally stop a lot of support moves going around, whether that would be hazards, baffle, and much more, which is ultimately very great. You can mix and match its coverage to hit Loomians and other stuff that your team is weak to, which is ultimately very great. And because of how consistent this Loomian is in this meta, I'm going to be putting it in the top 20. So the next Loomian is definitely going to be somewhat controversial because of how low it may seem, but I'm going to be explaining right now. Next up, we have Cleon. And Cleon has cemented itself to be a pretty essential Loomian on most bulky teams and general offense and balance in general. Cleon has a lot of support moves that it can support its team with, that being Gust to remove hazards, enchantments, which albeit aren't that great as people were making out to be in the beginning, but it's still great there. And it also has the ability of having to stop offensive threats in this metagame such as Soulburst, Eruptodon, and Jusa. Both of those Loomians being very great in this metagame. What's also good about Cleon is that it also has very good damage output with Stratagem, which I don't have with this moveset, and this moveset overall just don't use it. And overall, Cleon is just one of the best Loomians in terms of range walling prowess. Anyways, now that we're done closing off the top 5 Loomians in the latter half of the tier list, let's talk about top 10 through top 15. Now, this Loomian is very controversial in my opinion because it is pretty clear to me, at least just in how I see it and a few others, is that Luminami, the next Loomian on this list, is kind of falling out of irrelevancy. Not because this Loomian is bad or anything, but the other water light type in this metagame, Jusa, is being preferred over it. But let's just talk about this Loomian really quickly. Everyone knows why this Loomian is so good. It has very great coverage on the melee side and range side depending on what you want to use. It can basically hit most things super effectively. Power Napper makes it so it's pretty much unstoppable on bulky teams and just offense in general because it's very hard to kill this thing. And with its mixed defenses, I kind of messed up here, but I don't really care. With its mixed defenses, all being pretty solid attacking stats to be mixed on both sides, and a good speed tier to just ultimately underspeed everything so you can utilize your Power Napper. It's overall just very great vibes for Luminami. Other than that, we do have another Loomian, which is going to be Dakuda. This moveset is pending. I'm personally trying out different movesets, but Dakuda, at least to me, has still stayed up in its high prowess of tiers that I've basically mentioned for quite a lot. Dakuda is not a lot of walls if you're running this correctly. For example, Dakuda, if you're running the Gamma Pulse over this, it basically has probably one of the best coverages in the game because you're basically relegated to using Soulburst Florant, Dokomori, and a few others in order to stop Dakuda, which is ultimately very great. And because of its unpredictability, this is also including Soulburst by the way, with its unpredictability, you don't really know what Dakuda is going to be doing at all times. You don't know if it's Soulburst, you don't know if it's actually a regular Dakuda set. That mind games on its own can prove to be very detrimental to your team. What's also great about Dakuda, more on that mind game specifically, you can particularly use a few of these movesets and not the other side of the moveset and then just go ham when the opponent least suspects it. Overall, Dakuda, from my experience and from others' experiences, along with some team building, looks to be one of the best Soulbursts as of right now, especially for the non-Soulburst section of Loomians that do have Soulbursts. Next up, it's everyone's favorite Loomian, Zulong. And Zulong, I've actually debated a bit on putting it higher on this list, but overall I think in the 10 to 15 range is perfectly fine for it. First off, Zulong is a little bit worse off in this meta, specifically because this meta is very bulky and Zulong can't really break through a bunch of the stuff anymore, but it still has pretty solid pivot in Ancient War and pretty good coverage overall. This is still very team building restricting in its metagame, as you're either forced to run Soulburst Gasstroke, Gargoyle Defense, very clever Cleones, Pyrolin, and a few others in order to keep your team safe from Zulong. And the metagame is actually shifting in a way where Zulong running Chili Chomp is actually very good, especially against bulkier teams that are utilizing Soulburst Gasstroke or Gargoyle Defense in order to be their Zulong stops. And Zulong, as always, being a pretty good Loomian to be a pretty good revenge killer or cleaner, it does that job pretty well. And overall, Ancient Roar is still the same as it was before, and Zulong, with its coverage, still hits as hard as before. It just has a few more answers to deal with, and this metagame isn't fit for it being the top tier. Zulong is still a pretty good Loomian either way. Next up, we're going to be talking about Nevermare, and Nevermare has proved itself to be really threatening. I really don't know how it took this long for Nevermare to be this good, but Nevermare is finally realized to be one of the best Loomians in this metagame. This is all because of its defensive typing. This Nevermare is not finished, as you can see, wrong moveset. Some guy that I got it from completely messed up the TPs, but anyways, Nevermare is very great because of its solid bulk. You'd think that 61 HP would hold this back very hard, but because of its great defensive typing, being able to resist important typings such as Electric, Immune to Light, and Brawler, and much more, makes Nevermare pretty great. Along with Bulk Up and Razor Sharp, let's just go over Razor Sharp real quick. Razor Sharp will be able to break through a bunch of melee defense Loomians. With enough setup, specifically if you bulk up on a swap, you can break Loomians such as Obsidian a lot more easier, and that's ultimately pretty great. Loomians or teams in this metagame are even running Loomians such as Seer Knight over their metal type slot just so they can stop Nevermare a lot more easier. And while Nevermare still does get answered by a melee defense Loomian such as Obsidian, like I said, you can also count in Conjurlin in that as well, and Bar Blast. Nevermare still applies pressure so well because of Razor Sharp being unpredictable in critting. It has overall good coverage. Replace Provoke for Primal Slash. Please replace Provoke for Primal Slash. And a pretty solid enough defensive typing and defensive base stats. It overall just makes Nevermare a lot more better. Anyways, speaking of Obsidian answering Nevermare, Obsidian is the next Loomian. Don't mind this moveset or personality, and anyways, Obsidian still proves itself to be very strong in this metagame. After using it and facing against it, despite me seeing that it gets hit by a lot of Loomians in this metagame super effectively, it really doesn't care. Resilience is so strong that it can just shrug off the hit the following turn, and most of the Loomians that do hit it super effectively are mostly 3-hit KOs, which does go in Obsidian's favor, as well as having the ability to run Drudge, which can offensively sweep teams, or running Burrow so you can beat other melee attackers which have bulk up or any type of setup more efficiently. This melee defense Loomian is probably one of the best melee defense walls as of right now. And the reason why it's so high up on here is because it can work on many different style of teams, whether that would be balance or semi-stall or some kind of offensive variant team. Obsidian can just do that all. And while it is somewhat worse than Conjurlin still doesn't have the great matchups that Obsidian has. So the first Loomian kicking off the top 10 is obviously Jusa. There is really nothing wrong with Jusa as of this moment. Please don't use this set, guys. Please don't use Incandescent. But anyways, Jusa as of right now is probably one of the best offensive Loomians in terms of setting up and matchups in this metagame. Jusa has a lot of great matchups, specifically against Soulburst or Reptidon, which is ultimately very good. Jolto is so offensively threatening because of Enchanted Coat, making it so it can pretty much beat most range attackers in the game. You're basically forced to run Gas Stroke, Cleon, or Tatab or Nevermare as checks for Jolto, and that on its own is very scary. Not to mention that on more bulkier teams that Jolto can also be playing the role as the stall breaker, where Jolto can be running Peace of Mind, 2 of its stab moves, and then Provoke, making it so Jolto can able to stop Gasstroke and Cleon, because Gasstroke and Cleon are setup dependent against Jolusa's, which ultimately makes Jolto really great. What's also good about Jolto is that it does have Deep Freeze, so for the plant types that want to swap in on its light type moves or its stab in general, Jolto does have counterplay for that, making Jolto a pretty strong offensive Loomian. There is one thing to note though, in that Jolto here, I messed up the TPs a bit, but Jolto here still has 95 base range attack, so it's not going to be hitting the hardest on first turn, but with a few setup moves with Peace of Mind, Jolto is going to be applying so much pressure. So the Loomian following Jolto is going to be Ferroglyph, and Ferroglyph I've been hard on lately, but overall this is probably one of the best sweepers in this metagame, if not the best sweeper. After testing this Loomian out, team building around it, and overall analyzing this, I've determined that all of my thoughts about it were pretty much wrong. Ferroglyph against bulkier semi-stall teams is one of the best matchups because of Provoke, Psycho Blast, and Peace of Mind. These 3 core moves makes it so Ferroglyph can pretty much break through any ranged wall, whether that would be Cleon, Pyrolin, Soulburst Gasstroke, and pretty much anything that doesn't have the coverage to hit this thing super effectively. What's also great about Ferroglyph is that Provoke stops these Loomians from setting up, or spreading hazards, or spreading statuses, and taking away Dissipate Pivot from specifically Cleon. This makes this Loomian very valuable to have on many different teams. It has a great speed tier, it has great attack without boost, and of course with boosts, and it has a solid enough range fence stat in order to set up and just overall kill the metagame. So the next Loomian on this list is going to be Jolto. Jolto is what I was referencing to when I was talking about Alantic, something that is better than Alantic as an electric type wall breaker, and Jolto is basically it. Its coverage allows it to hit most of the metagame super effectively and eliminates a lot of its previous answers that with the addition of Earthquake. What's also great about Jolto is that it forces specifically Robust Gargoyle Defense and Tungeling as for all you Loomians in order for your team to keep safe against other Jolto. What's also great about Jolto is that Ambush is going to be utilizing a lot of this great damage, and you can play around Loomians that are trying to swap in on your coverage to waste your ambush ability using Drudge. Drudge turns you into one of the best sweepers in this metagame in terms of pure damage output and speed tier, and in combination with its speed tier and melee attack stat, as well as its pretty solid defenses, this makes Jolto one of the best Loomians in terms of wall breaking and sweeping, all packaged into one Loomian. Do note that it still doesn't want to take as much hits as it can, because while this bulk is definitely good, it doesn't want to take hits from most offensive Loomians, and its speed tier still gets outsped by a lot of offensive Loomians. However, Jolto and Eruptodon all get compensated with the move Baffle, bringing them into battle very efficiently and especially for free, and to make up for their subpar speed tiers, they will able to outspeed whatever is in front of them because of Baffle's -1 speed, and more so on Eruptodon. It has great coverage, better setup in terms of pure damage, and this of course forces Cleon or Jolto on many teams. If your team isn't running that, you should be running a Fischl or an Akalos, which ultimately aren't really that great in this metagame. So Soulburst Eruptodon is really great alongside with Jolto. The next Loomian on this list is somewhat debatable on its placement, but I think it's really great. And of course, we're talking about Tatab. Tatab has stayed to be one of the best offensive Loomians in this metagame, specifically because of how hard it can hit with its stabs and the ability to cripple its answers with poison and barter. Usually, something like Tatab, which I did mention in my tier list video before, your snack is a common swap in for this, which might be bad because your snack is just so great in this metagame because of Baffle, but Tatab has the ability to punish your snacks with barter or poison. This also goes for its other answers such as Obsidian and Bar Blast, as well as other niche answers like Harvesect. This makes it so good for Tatab right now because it can cripple its answers and it hits very hard, and in combination with the specialty boots, you can be one of the hardest hitting Loomians on the team while also being the fastest Loomian on the team. This is further compounded with the fact of its great speed tier of 104 with and without boots, being able to outspeed pretty much every wall breaker, and its melee attack stat of 126, just like Jolto's, except it has the rallyable personality in order to hit so hard. And closing off the top 4 through 10 Loomians, it's really not a competition at this point. It's going to be your snack. Your snack is probably the most influential Loomian in this metagame, specifically because it can utilize Baffle. Baffle is one of the strongest attributes to have in this metagame because you can enable so much offensive pressure using the Loomians such as Jolto, Eruptodon, like I said before. You can even use other stuff such as Alantic, Valkyrie, Dakuda, Colossotrops, and even more to enable pressure so much easier. Because it does have the tank ability, even if you're invested in one defense, and this is going to change with the PVP 2.0 update, you're able to take hits from pretty much anything in this metagame. What's also great about your snack at this moment is that it does have the ability to break clutch plushies or clutch abilities with Shadow Sprint. It has Slap Down to remove items, so you can pretty much use Slap Down whenever your tank isn't broken, and this makes your snack overall one of the best Loomians. Utilizing Robust, you can pretty much wall any melee attacker or take advantage of them with Baffle that don't even have super effective hits for you. Even neutral hits, you just shrug off immediately, and that just makes your snack so great. Teams are even trying to build around your snack or just trying to prep against it, even though Baffle has a really hard texture and counterplay that really doesn't exist in this metagame at this moment. Alright, so the number 5 Loomian of the list, or in the top 5, is Soulburst Gasstroke. Soulburst Gasstroke, everyone knows how great this Loomian is. This Loomian, when not paired against a Provoke user, which is not that many, or an Ice type user, Gasstroke pretty much just sits on every single range attacker in the game because of not mysterious toxins, but because of its Soulburst ability, being able to pretty much block all fire type weaknesses and make your weakness to ice 2 times. This makes Gasstroke wall ungodly amounts of range attackers. What's also great about Gasstroke is because of Tamp, boosting your damage with stratagem and overall boosting your defenses, which makes Gasstroke very great. This is so good because unless you don't have a dedicated melee wall breaker that can consistently 2-hit KO Gasstroke with specific investments and Tamp, Gasstroke will be able to live 2 hits from most melee attackers, making Gasstroke able to just set up on them if given the chance. Tamp on its own against melee attackers is super punishing, and Tamp against range attackers, obviously those range attackers will never win. And what probably puts this thing over the edge for most people is Poison. Even if you have a melee attacker, not just talking about stratagem, they're always going to be chipped specifically with Poison, and because Gasstroke just works so well on more bulkier teams like Semistall and Balance, that is most likely going to be happening if you're not playing correctly around this. Soulburst Gasstroke basically made a wake-up call for pretty much everyone to the fact that their teams need to be well built, or else Gasstroke is going to be sweeping them. So before I can talk about the top 3 Loomians, I must first discuss the honorable mentions.
First off, let's gonna be talking about Seer and Stratosaur, one of the better metal types in this metagame. Seer is ultimately one of the better metal types in my opinion, especially because it has great matchups. Like a metal type, it has the matchups against Charonix, Novidius, and Glaciadia, and Specmior, and it also does have good matchups against Nevermare, which is an increasingly big threat in this metagame and is something worth preparing for. However, it does have a lot of issues, specifically with its defensive typing of fire and metal being weak to a lot of stuff. It also does have pretty iffy matchups because it can get taken advantage so easily by fire types and anything that can resist its coverage. That on its own makes Seer an honorable mention and not a top 20 Loomian. Other than that, we do have Stratosaur, which for the same reasons as Seer this does get exploited so easily, specifically by electric types, so it won't really touch up on there as well. Pyrolin is also a surprise pick that I really wanted to put in the top 20, but I can't really fit this in anywhere because, kind of like Seer it does get taken advantage of very easily, specifically by water types like Cleon and Jalusa and Dakuda, which are all very common in this metagame. It also does get kind of outclassed in terms of walling range attackers, specifically Gasstroke. Pyrolin only has a few matchups in front of Gasstroke. Specifically, it's not really affected by Chili Chomp Zulong. It can deal with the likes of Wintrix better. However, Soulburst Gasstroke in 9 times out of 10 of the situations is always going to be your range defense Loomian of choice. The fire type slot is also getting cramped up pretty badly with Seer and Soulburst Rosbudon taking those slots, and right now Pyrolin is also not really the greatest as of this moment. However, it is still a very good Loomian, and probably the best out of the honorable mentions. Next up, we do have Barblast, which Barblast is ultimately a pretty good Loomian. However, just because of Obsidian being preferred more on more balanced or offensive oriented teams, as well as Tundralane being preferred on more semi-stall oriented teams, Barblast really has a struggle, or it really struggles in finding a place in this metagame, mainly because of how much is being used instead of it. It still has great attributes like its coverage, its damage, and poison or ice cold traps or power focus, but right now I really don't think that this is worth at all using when you do have Obsidian or Tundralane, depending on your playstyle. Imperior is also going to be an honorable mention. Resentful is still very strong, however it's going to be nerfed soon to 50%, so nothing worth the ranking here when it's just going to be nerfed in the next few updates. Mutagon here, and Dragoon. I don't have a Dragoon on me at the moment since someone is borrowing it, so you're just going to have to deal with this. Dragoon doesn't have Staunch, Mutagon doesn't have Quick Punch, or Mutagon still has Quick Punch, so there's really no point in ranking these Loomians, especially when they're still Ubers, making it very speculative on whether or not to rank them. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the top 3 Loomians in Loomian Legacy. Alright, so the top 3 Loomians, let's get right into it. The first Loomian is obviously going to be Gargolem Defense. Gargolem Defense has cemented itself to be one of the strongest Loomians in this, or not strongest, but one of the bulkiest Loomians in this metagame that can have itself placed in many different teams and work very efficiently. Gargolem Defense has relegated itself to be one of the best hazard removers, especially because of its air typing and immunities and all that stuff, being able to pretty much gust off of most hazard setters, and it has its own hazards to set up in front of it. And if you aren't carrying some type of spirit type or ice type, Gargolem Defense is most likely going to be sitting on most of your team, which is the harsh reality in terms of fighting Gargolem Defense. What's also great about Gargolem Defense is it has Driving Force to stop Loomians from setting up on it, which somewhat solves its lack of damage power. and driving force and barbs. It's a day old, it's a very year old combo. This is still a very good combo. And empathize is admittedly clowned on by some people, is one of the best moves you can run on Gargolem defense, because Gargolem defense can leech off of HP and is very good against more teams that have strong attacking Loomians that normally would 2-hit KO you, but now won't anymore, and you can just leech off HP for free. Slapdown is also another good option for Gargolem defense. However, it is not that great, specifically because you'd rather set up hazards or remove hazards, as well as forcing other Loomians out instead of trying to remove items. As well as having very good mixed bulk. It does have 55 HP, but that doesn't really matter because its bulk is just too high and distributed very well. This makes Gargolem defense a very strong and very splashable Loomian that you can fit on many different teams. Other than that, the number 2 slot is going to go to Glaciadia. And Glaciadia, ever since release, has made itself very clear that it's probably the best sweeper in the entire game. This thing alone forces metal types on many different teams, specifically Valkyrie or Seer-Knight or Stratosaur, and it can even break through Stratosaur under certain conditions. And overall, Glaciadia is probably one of the best Loomians in terms of damage output, because Frost Beam on top of Chilling Passion is very good. Deep Freeze allows it to hit ice types. Draco Beam allows it to pressure things heavily. Even if the -2 sucks, this is still a very high base power move in the early game that you can just throw off. It does have a good speed tier of 111. It does have a really good HP stat. It has pretty good bulk and HP and range defense, and its range attack on top of Chilling Passion makes Glaciadia hit so hard. What's so great about Glaciadia is, like I said, forces metal types on a lot of teams, and this can function as a pretty good cleaner or sweeper because of how hard and how much things it does outspeed. This thing is only gonna get outsped by Hunter, Zulong, and other stuff like that, and boots users, but ultimately, Glaciadia is a threat that is going to be threatening any sort of competitive team. And finally, number 1, it's going to go to Charonix. I mean, who wouldn't put Charonix in their top 20, especially in the top 3 spot? Charonix can fit on pretty much any team like Gargolem defense, and unlike Gargolem defense, it does actually have offensive pressure. It has Spite, which, like I discussed in my Charonix analysis video, pretty much destroys any sort of metal type matchups, unless you're a Stratosaur or a Valkyrie, which have Rejuvenate or Perch to solve that issue. And other than that, Charonix also has great pivot with Flash and Flee. It has Gust to remove hazards. It has Frost Beam to take care of specific type matchups, specifically Earth and Air types like Gargolem defense. It can also use this to able to hit the plant types that can swap in on Flash and Flee. And Spectral Burst can also be ran if you're trying to do something funky. However, Spite is always going to be the best move for that. Not to mention, it has a lot of great matchups in this metagame because of how well its defenses are mixed out. Even despite this 56 HP, it does have the ability to do pretty well against a lot of range attackers and melee attackers alike. What's also great about Charonix is that, like Glaciadia, it forces metal type answers, or at least something range bulky, onto teams so that teams aren't just destroyed by Charonix. And overall, because of how easy to use this thing is, how easy to insert this Loomian on many teams is, I think that Charonix, at least in my opinion, is the best Loomian in the entire metagame. So let me know your thoughts on this tier list and overall the thoughts on the video. If you want to argue with me down in the comment section below, go ahead. I really don't care, but of course anything you can add is always useful. And yeah, thank you for watching through to the end, or you just skipped or whatever. That's pretty much all I can say. I'll be making more videos in the future, so like and subscribe if you want to stay tuned to that. And yeah, this is Cotton Stoops, signing off to remind you that Zulong is still a dumpster fire.